I'm sure you know King Arthur and the Odyssey, but do you know Dede Korkut? Actually, Turkic people have their own legends as well, but even Turks themselves know so little about them, only the names and not the stories themselves. So I decided why not make some series retelling these stories in English. But before I do that, I think I should give you a little bit of context about what Dede Korkut really is. Dede Korkut stories are a collection of around 13 narratives, preserved in manuscripts dating roughly to 16th century. The most well-known copies are found in Dresden and the Vatican. But you should keep in mind that these stories aren't starting with these manuscripts. They're actually the result of something much older, an oral tradition that survived centuries until someone finally took a pen and paper to write them down. So what we have today is not the original version. It is the version that survived. And by that, I'm not saying they are not real. I'm saying that looking for an original piece in this context doesn't make the most sense. Because here we don't have a single author. We don't have a definitive text. We instead have a cultural memory, captured at one point in the time. Among Turkic nomadic societies, literature was not something that's producing books or something that you get from books. It was something that was performed. Stories were told out loud, passed from master bard to the apprentice, from parents to the children, repeated, reshaped, changed, but remembered. So these stories weren't created for you to sit down alone and read. It was something that you would watch, a performance. And this is why I believe you need to know how to read these texts. If you sit down and approach them like some deep modern literature, you will be disappointed. Because that's not what they are. They're much more compressed, more direct, more functional. Some details will be skipped, some details will be repeated again and again. But it's not because they didn't know any better, that's because they designed it exactly that way. These stories were likely performed with music, with an instrument at hand. So certain parts where they keep repeating the same details would work like a chorus. And other parts where they get very theatrical and exaggerate things, well, they would be performed theatrically. It would be easier to remember, more captivating for the audience. And who knows, maybe they had their own TikTok generation that they had to keep the attention of. So what did we say? You do not approach them like modern novels. You need to approach them with curiosity. You need to analyze them. You need to look for patterns, see what they keep repeating. Pay attention to the words, to values, to the decisions. Ask questions like what do they reward, what do they punish? What is shameful for them? What is heroic? Because we all know heroic is a good thing. But what do they regard as heroic? What is the difference of their heroes and the heroes of a Marvel movie? So compare it to today, but more importantly, compare it to the other civilizations that lived at the same time. The real value is not only in what happens, but also what it reveals. When we analyze the stories that way, there will be a lot of things that surface. For example, the way these stories handle religion. The version that we have at hand is written at a time that Islam was already well established in the Turkic world. But the deeper structure of the stories often feel much older than that. And sometimes you can actually feel the tension between these two layers. Without giving any spoilers, another key aspect of the stories for me was the way women were represented, the way they were portrayed, the way they influenced stories, the way they had a role in society. There are many other details that you can dive into like this depending on what you are personally interested in. So basically, this is not a normal book and you should not treat it like a normal book. You should look at it as a reflection of how people thought, what they valued, and how they saw the world. But while making your analysis, you should also keep in mind that this was probably not the version that people would tell their children in their villages. It was rather a version that was politically motivated and used as a propaganda tool for legitimacy reasons, but that's a whole different topic. And one last thing, I'm still deciding how I will retell these stories. I could just read them in English, which would be very boring because the translation is, I'm not gonna say terrible, because I understand the language is very difficult to translate to English while keeping the spirit and the cultural nuances. It just doesn't hit the same. So I could just retell these stories from my lenses and do my analysis when I'm done with all these stories. Or I could both read the stories and do analyses while reading them, giving the cultural aspects, things that you might not realize as a non-Turkish person, things that I think other people might not know or realize. So you can let me know under the comments which one you prefer. And I will see you in the first story. I mean, not as a character in the story, but like under the comments. I think that was obvious, but just in case, do not give any false